The box was already packed when the phone rang. It was a Tuesday in November, 1971, and Harry Callahan had been sitting on the edge of his bed for 40 minutes looking at a cardboard box that contained everything he owned that he considered worth taking. It wasn't much. A photograph. 2 books. A spare holster. The watch Claire had given him 3 years before she died, which he never wore but could not bring himself to leave behind. The box was open. The lid was beside it on the floor. He had not taped it shut yet because some part of him was still deciding whether the lid was going to go on tonight or whether it was going back in the closet. The phone rang 4 times before he picked it up. It was Bressler. His voice had a specific quality that Harry recognized immediately, the voice of a man who had been awake for a long time and had made several calls before this one and had not liked the results of any of them. "I need you on Polk Street," Bressler said. "Right now." Harry looked at the box. "I'm off duty." "I know you're off duty." A pause. "There's a girl, Harry. 14 years old. Taken 3 hours ago. We have a location but the negotiator's not getting anywhere and the man inside has already fired twice through the door." Harry didn't say anything. "I wouldn't call you if I had someone else," Bressler said, and this was the truest thing anyone had said to Harry in weeks, and they both knew it. Harry looked at the box for another 3 seconds. Then he stood up, took his jacket from the chair, and picked up the .44 from the nightstand where he had placed it when he came home that evening and where it was going to stay, he had told himself, until morning. He left the box on the bed, lid still off, lid still on the floor. He went to Polk Street. 3 weeks earlier, Harry had walked into Captain DeSalvo's office and placed his badge on the desk. DeSalvo had looked at the badge and then at Harry and then at the badge again. He was a political man, the kind of captain who had risen through the department not through exceptional detective work but through the careful management of relationships with people above him in the chain. He and Harry had not gotten along since DeSalvo's assignment to the division 18 months prior, which was the shortest time Harry had ever managed to generate a formal conflict with a superior officer, and this was an accomplishment of sorts. "What is this?" DeSalvo said. "Not a question." "I'm done," Harry said. DeSalvo leaned back. He was not surprised, Harry noticed. He was calculating. "You've got 14 years in. You walk now, you lose your pension eligibility by 6 years. I know. The fraternal order will fight it. You'll be tied up in." "I know," Harry said again. DeSalvo studied him. "This is about the Harding case." It was about the Harding case. It was about the Harding case in the same way that a dam breaking is about the last drop of water. The specific incident that had finally exceeded the capacity of a structure that had been under pressure for years. Robert Harding was a convicted rapist who had been released 14 months into a 3-year sentence because a clerical error in the evidence processing chain had given his attorney grounds for appeal that a sympathetic judge had chosen to act on. Harding had been out for 11 days when he attacked a woman named Teresa Garza in her apartment in the Sunset District. Harry had worked the original case. Harry had worked the new case. Harry had stood in Teresa Garza's apartment looking at what Robert Harding had done and then driven directly to the courthouse and sat outside the judge's chambers for 2 hours waiting for him to emerge from a lunch meeting and had told him, in language that was specific and controlled and left no ambiguity about Harry's assessment of the judge's decision, exactly what the consequences of the ruling had produced. The conversation had generated a formal complaint. The formal complaint had generated a meeting with DeSalvo that had generated a written reprimand. The written reprimand had been the last thing. Not because it was unjust, Harry had known exactly what he was doing outside the judge's chambers, and he did not consider it unjust to be held accountable for it. Because the accounting of the whole sequence, Harding's release, Teresa Garza, the courthouse, the reprimand, had produced in Harry a clarity he had been approaching for years but had never fully arrived at until that specific Tuesday afternoon when he sat at his desk and read the reprimand and understood, with sudden and complete certainty, that he was done. The Harding case was the last one, Harry said to DeSalvo. But it was a long time coming. DeSalvo picked up the badge. Turned it over once. Set it down. I'm going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, he said. You're going to go home. You're going to sleep. If you still feel this way in 72 hours, come back and we'll process the resignation through proper channels. I don't need 72 hours. No, DeSalvo said. But I do. He pushed the badge across the desk. Take it with you. Harry took the badge with him. He did not wear it. For 3 weeks he went through the specific and disorienting experience of being a man who was still technically employed by an institution he had already mentally vacated. He came in. He filed paperwork. He attended the minimum required briefings. He did not work any active cases, because working active cases required a level of engagement that he had already redirected away from this job and toward the life he was planning to live somewhere other than San Francisco. He had thought, concretely and specifically, about where he would go. Not the North, not yet, that would come later, in a different November 15 years from now. He had thought about Sacramento, which had the advantage of being close enough to return for specific reasons if specific reasons materialized and far enough to constitute an actual departure. He had thought about Reno, which had the advantage of being further and the disadvantage of being Reno. He had settled, in his private planning, on a town he had passed through once on a case and found possessed of the specific quality he was looking for, ordinary. Not beautiful, not remarkable, not the kind of place that asked anything of you. Just ordinary, which was the quality that San Francisco had stopped being for Harry sometime in the years after Claire's death, when the city's rottenness had stopped being a thing he was fighting and had started being a thing he was drowning in. The box on the bed was the visible expression of 3 weeks of this planning. He had packed it slowly, over several evenings, each item considered. The watch. The photograph. The 2 books. One was a novel he had been meaning to read for years and never had, one was a technical manual on criminal investigation that he had used so many times its spine had split and been retaped. He wasn't sure why he was taking the manual. You didn't take your professional references to a life you were leaving the profession for. But he put it in the box anyway, because setting it down felt like the wrong kind of finality, and Harry was pursuing the right kind of finality, which was the kind that let you move forward rather than the kind that closed everything behind you. The phone rang on a Tuesday. He went to Polk Street. The building on Polk was a residential hotel, the kind that San Francisco had dozens of. 3 stories, cramped corridors, rooms that had originally been meant for short stays and had become, for a specific population of the city's most precarious people, permanent addresses. The man inside was named Gary Nolan. He was 37 years old, with a history that the officer who briefed Harry in the street read from a notepad in the flat voice of someone summarizing a file he had not had time to fully absorb. 2 prior arrests, 1 conviction, released 8 months ago. Mental health history. No known relationship to the girl. The girl's name was Maria Santos. 14 years old. Had been taken from the street in front of the hotel 3 hours ago, which meant she had been inside for 3 hours, which was long enough for the situation to have calcified into the specific configuration that was the most dangerous kind. Long enough for Nolan to have committed to whatever psychological framework had produced the initial action, long enough for him to have stopped thinking about exit and started thinking about conclusion. The negotiator's been on the phone with him for 90 minutes, the briefing officer said. He's not responding to de-escalation. He fired twice through the door when a uniform tried to approach the stairwell. Harry looked at the building. 3rd floor, 2 windows lit. What does he want? He hasn't said. Then the negotiator doesn't have a problem to solve, Harry said. He has a man who's already passed negotiation. Bressler appeared at Harry's shoulder. What do you need? Clear the stairwell. Everyone off the 2nd floor. Get me the room number and keep the phone line open, but don't have anyone talking on it. He paused. And get me a key to the room next door. What are you going to do? Harry looked at the lit windows. 3rd floor. The specific geography of a situation he had read in the first 30 seconds of arriving and was now ready to enter. I'm going to go talk to him, Harry said. Not through a phone. The stairwell smelled of cigarette smoke and damp plaster and the particular staleness of a building that had been standing too long and been maintained too infrequently. Harry went up slowly, not because he was afraid but because slow was the correct speed for a stairwell in a residential hotel at 11 o'clock at night when a man with a gun was 30 feet away on the other side of a door that had already been shot through twice. He counted the steps. 17 from the 2nd floor landing to the 3rd. He noted the position of the door, which was at the end of a narrow corridor, and the angle of the 2 windows he had seen from the street, which told him the room's layout: bed against the far wall, window to the right, door on the left, approximately 300 square feet. He did not knock on Nolan's door. He went to the room next door, which was empty, and used the key Bressler had obtained, and went inside, and stood very still in the dark for 11 seconds listening to what was on the other side of the wall. He could hear Nolan moving. The specific rhythm of a person who was not sitting, who was pacing, who had been pacing for a long time and whose pacing had the quality of something mechanical rather than purposeful. The pacing of a man who was managing a state rather than working toward a decision. Harry knocked on the wall. Not loudly. 3 times, evenly spaced. The pacing stopped. Gary, Harry said. His voice was calm and carried easily through the wall. Not a shout, not a whisper, the specific middle register that carried information without carrying threat. My name is Harry Callahan. I'm a detective. I'm in the room next door, not in your hallway. I'm not coming through your door. I just want to talk. Silence. Long enough that Harry began calculating the next move. Then Nolan's voice, muffled through plaster, high with a specific kind of strain: they'll rush me when I open up. Nobody's rushing anything, Harry said. The hallway is empty. Has been for 10 minutes. I can prove it. Open your door an inch and look. But you don't have to. Another silence. Then, what do you want? Same thing you want, Harry said. To get out of this without anybody getting hurt. The girl's not hurt. I know, Harry said. And this was important. This was the first real piece of information. He had not been sure, until Nolan said it, whether Maria Santos was alive and unharmed or something worse. She was neither hurt nor identified as a bargaining piece. She was simply there, which meant Nolan had not entered this situation with a clear plan for her and was now inside it without knowing how to conclude it. I believe you, Harry said. Will you let her come to the door? She doesn't have to go into the hallway. Just to the door. A long pause. The longest since Harry had knocked on the wall. Why? Because if she can tell me she's all right, I can tell the people downstairs she's all right, and that changes the temperature of what's happening out there. Right now they're assuming the worst. If I can tell them she's okay, everyone gets a little more time to figure out how this ends well. The silence stretched. Harry waited. This was the part that required the specific quality of patience he had built over 14 years of exactly these moments, the patience of someone who understood that the next thing to happen needed to happen on Nolan's timeline, not Harry's, that pushing would close whatever door was currently opening. He heard movement. The specific sound of a door unlocking. A girl's voice in the hallway, "I'm okay." It was barely above a whisper, but it was clear and it was true. Harry exhaled once, quietly. "Thank you, Gary." That helped. He waited 3 beats. "Now. Tell me how you want this to end." It took another 40 minutes. Harry spent most of it against the wall of the adjacent room, talking through plaster to a man he had never met about a life that had produced this specific Tuesday night in November. Nolan was not a monster. Harry had encountered monsters, had developed over 14 years of precise and reliable ability to identify them, and Nolan was not one. He was a man who had made a terrible choice in a bad moment and who was now trapped inside its consequences without any clear path to an exit that didn't end with him in handcuffs or on a gurney. Harry talked him through the exits. Not as a negotiating tactic, not as a psychological technique he had been trained in and was now applying. Simply as a man on the other side of a wall presenting a frightened person with an honest accounting of what the available options were and what each of them cost and which ones led somewhere survivable. At 12:40 in the morning, the door on the 3rd floor of the Polk Street residential hotel opened. Gary Nolan came out with his hands up and no weapon visible. Maria Santos came out behind him, unhurt, moving quickly toward the officers at the end of the hallway who took her immediately in the direction of the stairwell and down and away from the 3rd floor and out into the November night air. Harry came out of the room next door and walked toward Nolan, who was already being approached by 2 uniformed officers. Harry let them handle it. He stood in the hallway and watched them and did not feel the particular satisfaction that people who haven't done this kind of work for a long time imagine you feel at moments like this one. What he felt was simpler and more physical than satisfaction, the specific settling of a body that has been held in a state of sustained alertness for 90 minutes and is beginning to release that state, the quiet after the loud thing, the ordinary returning to replace the extraordinary. Bressler appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at Nolan being walked down the corridor. He looked at Harry. He didn't say anything for a moment. "The girl's all right?" Harry said. "She's all right." Bressler paused. "How'd you know talking through the wall would work?" "I didn't," Harry said. "But the phone wasn't working, and knocking on the door would have put me in the angle of fire. It was what was left." Bressler nodded slowly. "I'm glad it worked." "So am I," Harry said, which was as close as he got to expressing what he was actually feeling, which was something more complicated than gladness and less definable than relief. He drove home at 1:15 in the morning and sat in the parking spot outside his building for 7 minutes before going up. The box was still on the bed. Lid still on the floor beside it. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Maria Santos, who was 14 years old and alive tonight because he had gone to Polk Street. He thought about the conversation through the wall, the specific texture of it, the way Nolan's voice had shifted over 40 minutes from the high-strained note of a man who had run out of options to something quieter and more resigned and ultimately more open. He thought about the moment Maria Santos had said "I'm okay" in the hallway and what that moment had felt like, the specific and irreplaceable quality of that 2-word sentence in the dark. He thought about Sacramento. He thought about ordinary. He picked up the box lid from the floor. Held it for a moment. Set it down again, this time on the dresser, out of the way. He put the watch back on the nightstand. He hung his jacket on the chair. He went to bed. In the morning he would go in and tell DeSalvo the 72 hours were up and he still felt the same way and they needed to process the resignation through proper channels. And DeSalvo would look at him and tell him there was a case, there was always a case, and Harry would listen, because listening was different from agreeing. And the case would be what it was. And Harry would make the decision he made, the same decision he remade every day for another 15 years. To stay, not because the city deserved it, not because the institution acknowledged it, not because the system was fixed or the judges were better or the Robert Hardings of the world had stopped being released early on clerical technicalities. But because of one Tuesday in November when a 14-year-old girl had said "I'm okay" in a hallway on Polk Street, and Harry Callahan had been the reason she could say it. That was enough. It had to be enough. It was. What Harry Callahan understood that night, and what he would keep understanding, in different forms, across 15 more years of exactly this kind of work, was that the decision to stay was not a grand philosophical commitment. It was not made once, in a single moment of clarity, and then settled forever. It was made in small, specific, concrete moments that accumulated into a career the way water accumulates into a river. Not through any single event but through the patient and continuous adding of one thing to another until the thing is too large and too moving to stop. The Teresa Garza case had nearly broken him. And he had been right to feel what he felt standing in her apartment that evening, the rage, the helplessness, the specific despair of a man who has done everything correctly and watched the system produce the wrong result anyway. That feeling was honest. It deserved to exist. It was not weakness and it was not burnout and it was not the sign of a man who had lost perspective. It was the sign of a man who still cared deeply enough about the outcomes to be genuinely damaged when the outcomes were wrong. The day Harry stopped feeling that damage was the day he would have become something worse than tired. But there was the box on the bed, and there was the phone call from Bressler, and there was Polk Street. And there was Maria Santos saying "I'm okay" in a dark hallway at 20 minutes to 1 in the morning, and there was Harry Callahan hearing it through a door he had not gone through, and there was the specific and permanent knowledge that he had been the person who made it possible for her to say it. That knowledge did not fix the Teresa Garza case. It did not fix the clerical error. It did not fix Robert Harding or the judge or the reprimand on DeSalvo's desk. It did not fix any of the things that had put a cardboard box on Harry Callahan's bed with the lid on the floor. What it did was simpler and more important than fixing anything. It gave him a reason. Not a reason to believe the system would do better tomorrow, because the system was going to be exactly what the system had always been. Not a reason to forgive the failures, because the failures were real and would keep being real. Just a reason to stay in the room one more day. To come back in the morning. To pick up the next case file and read it with the same attention he had brought to the last one, and the one before that, and the ones going back 14 years to the beginning. The reason was not abstract. It was 14 years old and it had been in a room on the 3rd floor of a residential hotel on Polk Street, and it had said "I'm okay." DeSalvo did not seem surprised when Harry came in the next morning and said the 72 hours were up. He was on the phone when Harry appeared in the doorway. He held up one finger. He finished the call. He set the receiver down and looked at Harry with an expression that was professionally neutral but contained, underneath the neutrality, the specific attention of a man who had been wondering about the outcome of this conversation since the night before. "The 72 hours are up," Harry said. "And?" DeSalvo said. A long pause. Long enough that DeSalvo leaned forward slightly, as though he needed to close the distance to hear the answer. "There's a follow-up on the Santos kidnapping," Harry said. "The DA's office wants statements. Nolan's public defender is going to move fast. I should be there when they interview him." DeSalvo was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out Harry's badge, and pushed it across the desk. Harry looked at it. Picked it up. Put it in his pocket. "I'll be in the Santos interview," he said. He left DeSalvo's office and went to his desk and opened the file that was sitting there waiting for him, the same way a file was always sitting there waiting for him, and he read the first page with the same flat, complete attention he had always brought to first pages of files, and the day began the way days began, with the work that was always there and the city that was always there and Harry Callahan who was, today, still there too. Gary Nolan pleaded guilty to charges of unlawful imprisonment and was sentenced to 3 years, of which he served 22 months. He was a troubled man who had made a terrible choice, and the consequences of that choice were appropriate, and Harry gave no further thought to him after the sentencing except on one occasion years later when a parole officer called to inform him that Nolan had been approved for release, which was the standard notification process, and Harry noted the call and returned to the case file that was open on his desk at the time. Maria Santos was 14 years old on the night of the Polk Street incident. She was 21 when she graduated from San Francisco State University. She was 24 when she passed the California bar exam. She was a practicing attorney in the Bay Area, and she had never met Harry Callahan, and she did not know his name, and there was no reason she would have. He was simply the detective who had worked her case, as noted in the official incident report, and the official incident report did not specify what Detective Callahan had done on the 3rd floor of the Polk Street Hotel or why it had worked or what it had cost him in any of the ways that mattered and that the official incident report had no column for. He thought about her once, years later, in the way you think about the specific moments that reorganized your life at its most critical junctures, not often, not obsessively, but with the particular clean recall that certain nights retain even as others blur. He had been reading the paper in his apartment, one of the last evenings before the retirement, and he had seen a brief item about a civil case that a Bay Area attorney had won on behalf of a low-income client, a case involving a landlord who had illegally withheld a security deposit from a family with 3 children, small by the standards of the legal world but real and specific to the people whose money it was. The attorney's name was listed at the end of the article. Harry read it once. He did not cut it out. He did not make a note of it. He set the paper down and went back to the case file he had been reading before, because the case file needed reading and the morning came early and there was work to do. But he sat quietly for a moment before picking the case file back up. Just a moment. Just enough to let the arithmetic of that particular Tuesday night in November 1971 add itself up one more time, the way arithmetic sometimes insists on completing itself whether you invite it or not. A box on a bed, a lid on the floor, a phone call at 11 o'clock, a girl in a dark hallway saying I'm okay, and a detective who had almost left San Francisco forever putting the lid back on the dresser and going to bed instead, and everything that had followed from that choice, including a civil attorney who had won a small case for a family with 3 children on behalf of a security deposit that was rightfully theirs. Harry picked up the case file. The work was there. It had always been there. It would be there in the morning. He was still here. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That had always been enough, on the nights it was hardest to believe it, and on the ordinary nights when it required no believing at all because it was simply true. The city still there, the work still there, Harry Callahan still there inside it, making the decision that wasn't a decision anymore because it had become, across 15 more years of Polk Streets and Bressler phone calls and files on desks, simply who he was. There were other nights like that November Tuesday. Not many. But enough to matter. In 1973 there was a night in February when Harry sat in his car outside the precinct for 22 minutes after a case closed in a way that produced the maximum legal outcome and the minimum justice, and he thought about Reno again, and about Ordinary, and then he went inside and picked up the next file. In 1976 there was a Sunday in August when he drove without a destination for 3 hours along the coast and ended up parked at a pull-off overlooking the Pacific and sat there until the light changed and the fog came in, and he drove back to the city because driving away from it felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with the specific and unchosen fact that San Francisco was where he was from, and what he was made of, and where his people were, and his people were not the police department and were not any specific individual who was still alive. His people were the woman on Clement Street putting out her coffee, the family in the warehouse that had not burned, the 14-year-old girl saying "I'm okay" in a dark hallway, the people who never knew his name and never needed to. Those were his people. He could not drive away from them. In 1978 there was a month, a whole month, late March into late April, when Harry came close to something more serious than resignation. He had been shot in the previous December, a relatively minor wound by the standards of wounds he had accumulated, and the recovery had been longer than expected and had produced, in the enforced stillness of recovery, a kind of extended reckoning that he had not invited and could not quite stop once it started. He lay in the spare apartment on Vallejo Street and thought about everything. About Claire. About Eddie Morrison. About Frank Kowalski's eroding confidence and Tom Driscoll's shoulder and the 43 pages in the bottom drawer and the woman in Teresa Garza's apartment and the judge in his chambers. He thought about all of it with the specific unwillingness of a man who has spent years not thinking about things in order to keep moving and who has been stopped by a bullet and now cannot avoid what the movement had been keeping at bay. He called Bressler on a Wednesday evening in April and told him he was thinking about making a change. Bressler was quiet for a moment. What kind of change? The permanent kind. Another pause. Then, carefully, "Are you talking about leaving the job?" "Yes," Harry said. "I think so. I think I've been thinking about it since November of '71 and I keep not doing it, and I'm not sure anymore why I keep not doing it." Bressler was quiet long enough that Harry thought the line had dropped. Then Bressler said, "I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before, and then I'm going to hang up and let you think about it." "All right." "The department doesn't know what it has," Bressler said. "It uses you and it doesn't know what it's using, and it won't acknowledge it, and it never will. That's true, and it's not going to change. But I know. And the people you've helped know, even if they don't know your name. And I've been watching you do this for 12 years, and I'm telling you, not as your supervisor, just as a man who's watched, that what you do is real. It matters in ways nobody has the right accounting for. And you already know this. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just reminding you that you know it." He hung up. Harry sat with the phone in his hand for a while. Then he set it down and looked at the ceiling and thought about a 14-year-old girl saying "I'm okay" in a dark hallway in November 1971. And he thought about a civil attorney who had won a small case for a family with 3 children, and he thought about all the Tuesday nights between the one and the other, and he counted them up, and the counting took a while, and when he was done counting he set the phone down and turned off the lamp and went to sleep. In the morning he called Bressler and told him he'd be back Monday. Bressler said good. Neither of them said anything else about it. The last time the box appeared was in 1983. Harry was 54 years old. He had been with the department for 28 years, which was 14 years more than the night in November 1971 when he had nearly been done with it. The box was different, a different box, found in a closet, smaller, the kind you use for books rather than life's essentials. But the experience was the same, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at it, deciding. This time he got as far as putting things in it. The same watch. A different photograph. Claire was in this one, a photograph taken the summer before the accident that Harry kept in a drawer because looking at it too directly was not something he had ever fully learned to do. The manual on criminal investigation, its spine retaped a second time. A notepad filled with handwriting he would not read again. He sat with the box packed and looked at it for a long time. He thought about Polk Street. He thought about the girl. He thought about I'm okay in a dark hallway. And then he thought, there will be another one. There is always another one. Some Tuesday night, some phone call from someone who has run out of people to call, some situation that has become what situations become when no one with the right capability has been willing to go into the room. There will always be another one, and the only question has ever been whether you're going to be there for it or whether you're going to be somewhere ordinary, and ordinary is fine, ordinary is what most people get to have and what you never quite figured out how to want. He sat with the box for 40 minutes. Then he picked up the telephone and called the precinct and asked what was on the board. There were 3 open cases. He asked about the second one. He listened to the briefing. He said he'd come in tomorrow. He put the box back in the closet. The watch went back on the nightstand. He turned off the light. He stayed. The night Harry Callahan almost left San Francisco forever was actually many nights. It was November 1971 and February 1973 and August 1976 and a whole month in the spring of 1978 and a Tuesday in 1983 and probably other nights he had forgotten or filed in the part of his memory where things that had not ultimately happened went to lose their detail. Each time the box appeared in some form. Each time the decision had to be remade from the beginning, because the decision was not the kind that stayed made. It was the kind that had to be remade continuously, against the evidence that accumulated continuously on the other side of the ledger, the failures, the wrong results, the Robert Hardings and the Teresa Garzas and the weight of what the system kept producing in the gap between what it was designed to do and what it actually did. Each time the decision was remade, it was remade for the same reason. Not an abstract reason. Not a philosophical position or a sense of duty or a belief that things would eventually get better. A specific reason. A face, a voice, a moment. The particular 2 words that a 14-year-old girl had said in a dark hallway at 20 minutes to 1 in the morning on a Tuesday in November 1971, and everything that had followed from them, and everything that would follow if he kept being the person who made such moments possible. That was what kept him. That was what always kept him. Not the city. Not the department. Not the badge in his pocket or the 44 on the nightstand or the cases on his desk or the outcomes that nobody in any official capacity would ever fully account for. The specific, particular, unrepeatable human reality of one person in trouble and one person who had been willing to go to the room. Harry stayed for that. He remade the decision for that, every time, in every form the box took across the years. Because someone was always in trouble. Because he was always one of the people who could go to the room. Because the room needed someone who was willing to go into it and talk through the wall and wait with the patience that 14 years, and then 28 years, of exactly this kind of work had built in him. Because the girl had said I'm okay. Because she meant it. Because he had been the reason she could mean it. That was the whole accounting. That was what it had always come down to, in the end, on the nights when the box was out and the lid was on the floor and San Francisco was as close as it had ever come to losing whatever Harry Callahan was, which was its most essential and most invisible and most permanently sufficient answer to the question that every city has to answer every day, which is, when the room gets dangerous and nobody else will go in, who goes in? Harry went in. He stayed. He always stayed.